Ponytails. Read by Scribbler. Overture by Exilo. Not since the first Grand Galloping Gala, many hundreds of years ago, had the ball been surrounded by so much controversy and fanfare. The storm rose up from announcements that Princess Celestia would not be attending this year's ball, something that had never happened in all the galas prior. Instead, Princess Luna would be serving as the Master of Ceremonies. All of Canterlot was in a fury. The announcement that non-ponies would be attending in great numbers was just salt in the wound. Despite the storm of dispute, the Grand Galloping Gala's date remained fixed firmly on the calendar. Eventually, the hatred and rage died away, as such petty emotions tend to do. Tickets went out to those deserving. Arrangements were made for the banquet, and decorations began to appear all throughout Canterlot, until the entire city had transformed into a stunning wonderland of regal affairs. The night of the gala was met with praise. The moods of any holdouts were lifted at the absolutely stunning display that Luna had prepared in her night sky. She had arranged a meteor shower, a once-in-a-millennia show, as she called it, that brought wonder and awe to even the hardest of hearts. That is not to say that every pony at the gala was happy. In fact, there was one Pegasus who seemed intent on lowering the mood of the entire ball. The Pegasus was of average size for a stallion, perhaps slightly stockier, closer in dimensions to an earthwalker than a fellow flyer. His coat was charcoal grey, though a mane of cyan kept him from being too boring in appearance. He wore a dour expression, and was sitting shoulder to shoulder with Sorin of the Wonderbolts, who wore a passive expression of his own. The two were towards the back of the ballroom, not drawing attention to themselves, and so the partygoers paid them no mind.
Buck up, Lane. Being a Wonderbolt isn't only about flying high and fast. Sometimes it's about keeping up appearance.
Thunderlane, the dark grey pony, sighed and shrugged.
It's alright. I just can't believe I finally get a day off and have to spend it here with a bunch of haughty twits.
Sorin shifted his weight and gave Thunderlane a gentle ram with his side.
That's just unicorns for you. And they're not all haughty. You should try talking to one.
Thunderlane looked out at the sea of ponies and the few non-ponies, such as griffins and the odd diamond dog. Sorin gave him another shove before turning and trotting off.
I'm gonna go find Rainbow Dash. Try not to spend the whole night brooding, all right?
Thunderlane rolled his eyes and lifted to his four hooves. His first step was rather hesitant, but he doubted any of the partygoers noticed. All any of them seemed concerned with was acting like stereotypical snobs, snouts high in the air, monocles somehow held in place over their eyes. It wasn't that Thunderlane disliked other ponies, he just wasn't sure how to act around them. He had lived most of his life in Cloudsdale, and so he rarely interacted with unicorns, let alone spoke to one for a prolonged period of time. He couldn't ever recall even meeting an Earthwalker. Thunderlane's ears twitched. He lifted his head and looked about, ears focusing on a rather haunting melody that was swelling through the confines of the ballroom. The echo of the dome-shaped room and the near-endless chatter of side conversations made it difficult to deduce where the music was coming from. But eventually, he inferred where the band was playing, and began to shove and push his way through the crowd towards it. He hated not being able to use his wings, but Sorin had given him very strict orders not to. Apparently, unicorns found it rude or some such absurdity. The fact that they were free to use their horns was just one more reason Thunderlane disliked them. At last, Thunderlane came to stand before the stage, where he could easily hear the rather haunting melody that was emerging from the entire band, but from one mare in particular. Granted, the pianist, harpist and trombonist all added their own sombre music, but Thunderlane's eyes and ears were focused on a grey mare, standing on her rear legs and gently stroking the strings of what looked like a gigantic violin. She was beautiful. Not beautiful like a unicorn, of course. When a beautiful unicorn walked into a room, all eyes were suddenly upon her. This mare's beauty was a little more subtle. Somehow, all her parts fit just right, and her face was rugged but well defined and quite cute. Her mane and tail were both well groomed. In fact, her smoky grey coat glowed just a little from the affection of a brush. She was beautiful, but what really stood out to Thunderlane was the sound of her music floating through the air of the ballroom. He focused on the bowstring, gently dragged across the giant violin, and listened with sharp ears at the sound that emerged. He was transfixed, so much so that only when the mare opened her eyes and met his gaze, he realized he had been staring. He suddenly felt quite embarrassed. Thunderlane decided he was thirsty and trotted towards a large bowl of punch. Much to his relief, there was a Pegasus mare standing by it, softly sipping from a glass of cherry-flavoured drink. The mare was short and dainty, with a crimson coat and a few white streaks running through her mane and tail. When Thunderlane came to stand beside her, she smiled sweetly and poured him a cup as well. "Are you as bored of this as I am?" she asked. Thunderlane took the glass with a delicate hoof and brought it to his lips. He sipped it.
Duty calls and all that. You?
"More or less the same. My friend Jack is working security. I agreed I would come along to keep him company during the downtime." Stretching her wings, the petite Pegasus took to the air and waved her forelegs several times. Thunderlane wondered why she was allowed to fly and he was not. Pushing through the crowd of unicorns, a large draft horse came trotting along. He was absolutely huge, and his impressive dimensions were only augmented by the shining golden armor that adorned his form. His coat was white, and he looked almost exactly like every other royal guard at the ball, save he was larger than the Pegasi or unicorns. The red Pegasus fluttered close to his face and tilted her head slightly to the side to better examine him. "Jack, is that you? I can't tell." The guard's nostrils opened, and he snorted loudly, blowing a gust of warm air that distorted the red Pegasus's flight. She returned to her spot beside Thunderlane, giggling softly.
"I can't believe Princess Luna made us use glamour spells,"
muttered the guard.
"I hate magic."
"Quit whining! You're doing your service to the Empire." The guard grumbled and looked to Thunderlane.
"I'm Jack,"
he said.
Thunderlane.
The Pegasus stallion said with a small nod. The music was starting up again. The song was, again, slow and methodical, and sent an odd shiver down Thunderlane's spine. He cocked his head towards the stage.
What is the mare's name? The one with the giant violin.
"What, just because I'm an Earthwalker I must know every other Earthwalker?"
The guard asked, and took a step forward. Thunderlane was not accustomed to being small. He was large for a Pegasi, and had spent most of his time on leave surrounded by unicorns, who were on average of lighter dimensions. Now he found himself feeling absolutely minuscule compared to the Earthwalker stallion in full armor. He actually took a step back.
I meant no disrespect.
He said politely.
I assume since you were a guard, you would know the guests.
The sight of Jack's large head was suddenly eclipsed by the red Pegasus's tail and rump as she fluttered right before the Earthwalker's face. "Jack, stop being a dummy and just tell him. I get you're annoyed, but give it some time and you can legally bounce some drunks." The red Pegasus fluttered back down, and Jack allowed himself a chuckle. He looked back to the stage and nodded.
"Her name is Octavia. Nice mare, if a bit, fragile."
What do you mean?
Thunderlane asked.
"She's in a bit of a bad relationship, you might say. Only time I ever see her smile anymore is when she's playing an instrument."
"The only time I ever see you smile is when you're digging a hole," the red Pegasus chirped in. "Must be something about being closer to the earth and all that shaman stuff." Jack grumbled, but said nothing. His ears twitched, and he turned his head at the sound of a ruckus, not too far away.
"Oh, stupid hornheads just can't hold their cider."
Before he left, he leaned down and touched his massive snout to the Pegasus's nose. She took it a step further and slipped out her tongue to lick up his face. Now, with a smile worn on his face, Jack turned and sifted into the crowd, heading towards the sounds of the fight.
You and the Earthy?
Thunderlane asked. The Pegasus smiled softly. Jack and I, yeah. Thunderlane thought to himself.
I don't mean to sound rude, but there's no other way to put this. What do you see in him?
You're from Cloudsdale, huh? Me too, but I live in Ponyville now. Jack, he's from Canterlot, but he doesn't like to admit it. I've been surrounded by earthies and hornheads since I was a foal, so I don't see his lack of wings. It's more than that, though. When you get to know him, Jack is sweet and tender and kind. He makes me feel good, and I'm happy when I'm around him. Sometimes love doesn't make sense, but I wouldn't trade Jackie for the world.
It must be nice to have something like that.
Thunderlane said.
Thank you for your time.
He felt a bit better, walking through the crowded ballroom. He felt a bit more mellow, a bit more happy. Maybe the red Pegasus had spiked the juice with something, or maybe the obvious affection had reminded him why he loved his fellow ponies so. He remembered why he had been so dedicated to joining the Wonderbolts in the first place. He shifted and slipped towards the stage, hoping to hear the grey mare's sombre song with happy ears. Much to his horror, she was already gone. Sifting through the crowds, he eventually managed to maneuver himself to a door in the back of the ballroom that said, "No exit." He looked around to check if anyone was watching, before slipping through the doorway and into a hall. Off in the distance, he just caught sight of a pair of grey flanks shifting from side to side, and the long black tail that belonged to the grey mare.
Octavia?
He called out, and the grey mare turned around. Thunderlane trotted briskly towards her, closing the distance. But when he was standing before her, he found himself at a loss for words, and settled on a rather blunt,
My name is Thunderlane.
Can I help you, Thunderlane?
The mare wore a scowl somewhere between bored and annoyed. She was carrying her instrument on her back, which was quite impressive, considering the instrument was almost twice her size, yet she showed not a hint of strain.
Would you like any help carrying that?
He asked. Octavia looked over her shoulder at the instrument, and shrugged. Carefully sliding it off her back, she waited until Thunderlane had come closer, and then helped him place it on his own back. Thunderlane almost lost his footing as the full weight settled on him, unprepared for the sheer dead weight. With a loud grunt of exertion, he managed to lock his knees and find his balance. He looked to the earth mare, who was far from large or stocky, and felt a sense of respect swell in his chest.
I've never seen a violin this big,
he said casually.
It is not a violin,
Octavia said, somewhat annoyed.
Oh, please forgive me, I'm not from around here. Do you call it a fiddle?
Octavia glared at him.
It is a cello. Well, that's what a proper musician would classify it as. It is actually an instrument of my own personal design, a hybrid of elegance of the cello and the emotion you can deliver with the double bass. It is something I've been working on for several months now. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to play it in public. That is not to say that anyone cared.
I must say, I found the music absolutely stunning, if a little frightening at times. The emotion was clear throughout it.
Octavia smiled slightly, though only for a heartbeat. In fact, Thunderlane was quite happy he didn't blink in that instance, or he would have missed the gesture completely.
Well, thank you. Thunderlane, was it? If you wouldn't mind carrying it outside, I can catch a cab. Please just be careful. It is the only functioning prototype I have.
Thunderlane adjusted the instrument on his back before resuming his walk. He did want to say something, to talk to the mare, but he could feel the oddness in the air, and thought it better to remain quiet. When they arrived outside, and Octavia was looking for a cab to wave down, he decided to make his move.
Where do you live?
He asked.
I wouldn't mind escorting you home. Or at least walk down the streets of Canterlot with a mare of your beauty.
Octavia looked to him, chuckled, and sighed.
You would want to come home with me, wouldn't you? She asked. Then you can meet Vinyl. And even though you assure me that you didn't realize I was that Octavia, suddenly the only mare you care about is the great and popular DJ Pone 3.
Octavia sighed.
I will take my instrument back, thank you. I can walk home from here.
I didn't mean to insult you.
Thunderlane said quickly.
I'm not even sure who this Vinyl is.
May I have my instrument, please?
Octavia said, standing firm. Thunderlane carefully slipped the case off his back. When he tried to help Octavia pick it up, she swatted him with her long tail and hoisted it up with her own strength. When it was secure on her back, she trotted down the road, flanks shifting side to side. Thunderlane looked back at the castle, then down at the road, fully illuminated despite the night hour due to the bright glow of meteorites in the sky. After a moment of debate, he trotted after her.
Octavia!
He called out. When she did not stop, but only walked faster, he took to the air and covered the distance between them with ease.
I'm sorry.
He said quickly, landing beside her.
I really don't know who this vinyl pony is. I'm from Cloudsdale. I'm only here to make an appearance on behalf of the Wonderbolts. I understand if you don't want to talk to me. Please just know, I didn't mean to offend you.
Octavia turned to him, glaring.
Look, you're sweet and a great actor, but I have done this tango before. I know what stallions like, and it's not me. They like exotic fur patterns and big rumps and stupid sunglasses that are worn even when it's dark out. They like simple, repetitive, pre-recorded beats, not some homely earthwalker with a muted baby of a cello and a double bass. So just do me a favour and go somewhere else. I'll even give your address to Vinyl if you want. Maybe she'll make a house call later.
Thunderlane took a deep breath.
I really don't know who Vinyl is,
he said, voice rising just a bit.
I didn't mean to offend you in any way. I really wanted to spend some time with you, so I hope you will accept my invitation to join me for a cup of coffee at that donut shop over there.
Octavia looked to the donut shop. The only storefront left open, possibly in all of Canterlot. The subtle glow of its lights were like a homing beacon for her rumbling tummy. It had been a long night after all. She hadn't been able to enjoy the snacks served at the gala. Without a word, she headed for the humble shop. Thunderlane trotted a few feet in front of her and, like a true gentle colt, opened the door. He was slightly afraid that when he turned his back, she would attempt to run away, but to his relief, she walked into the shop.
Good evening, Octy,
said the tan-coloured unicorn, dressed in a white shirt and wearing a cute white hat atop his crown.
Good evening, Joe, Octavia said. May I have the usual, please?
And for your date?
Joe asked. Octavia's face turned a subtle shade of red and her ears drooped. Thunderlane stepped forward and politely said,
I'll just have a cup of coffee.
They took a seat at one of the tables against one of the large windows. Thunderlane had a suspicion it was so Octavia could simply stare out at the night and not make conversation. Ever the gentleman, Thunderlane pulled Octavia's chair out and helped her sit before taking a seat across from her.
I really admire your dedication to this role, the Earthmare said. Like I said, just write down where you're staying or give me your demo disc, and I'll pass it along to Vinyl. Mud Pony's honour.
What do I have to do to prove that I'm not only not interested in this Vinyl pony, I have no idea who she is?
Joe came trotting over, carrying a serving tray beside him with his magic's embrace. He set down a rather boring white mug before Thunderlane, and what had to be the most elaborate cappuccino in all of Equestria before Octavia. Served in what appeared to be a crystal chalice, the drink was topped with several layers of frosty whipped cream. Chocolate sprinkles and flakes of cinnamon broke the monotony of the frosty white mountain. Crowning the mountain was a chocolate-sprinkled donut. Octavia pulled the chalice and slipped her tongue out, running it over the whipped cream. Plunging her puckered lips into the mountain, she sipped at the drink before leaning back. Her tongue slipped over her face, whipping away the whipped cream.
I'm sorry, she said, plucking the donut off the top and nibbling on it. I may sort of have a bit of a roommate complex.
That's who Vinyl is? Your roommate?
Yes, my roommate. We've been friends since we were foals. She and I went to school together, and we were roommates back in college too. Now we just share an apartment.
She looked to Thunderlane, wondering if he was bored, but instead he smiled softly.
Tell me about her.
Octavia shrugged.
Vinyl is Vinyl. There's really no other way to describe her. She goes by the stage name DJ Pone 3, but her real name is Vinyl Scratch. She's been my friend for as long as I can remember. Well, I've been her friend. I'm not sure what she is to me. We were in school and college together. I was first chair in the band, she was second, though I knew she always hated the violin. Then one day, she finally got the chance to start DJing at some local club, and poof, her fame skyrocketed, just like that. I've been studying everything with strings since foalhood, but she puts a couple of tired beats together and has some flashy lights, and the Philistines just can't help but bop their heads like a bunch of infants.
Octavia giggled for reasons Thunderlane was not completely sure of.
But I'm not jealous of her success, she said.
Clearly.
Thunderlane managed to joke.
I'm really not. I love vinyl like my sister, and I am happy that she finally found something she loves. When she first got her cutie mark, she was terrified her special talent was composing classical music. She turned white. I mean, whiter than usual. Turns out she is a composer, just not in the traditional sense.
What bothers you then?
Octavia thought for a moment.
I just wish that she felt the same compassion for me that I feel for her. That's what bothers me.
What do you mean?
Thunderlane asked. He could figure it out if he really set his mind to it, but he thought it might be cathartic for Octavia to talk about whatever was bothering her. She occupied a few precious moments with sipping at her drink. She nibbled on her donut, both to occupy some time and because she really was hungry.
To me, vinyl is my sister, and that's what she'll always be. To vinyl, I'm just an artifact from her old life. I'm just some cute mud pony who always plays funny instruments and can be the butt of all her jokes when she has her friends over. I'm the silly mare who carries her back to the loft after she's spent the whole night partying, and covers her rent when she's spent all her money on new sunglasses.
Octavia's ears were drooping, and she was staring quite intently at the cappuccino, as if it might reveal some deep secret.
That's what bothers me, I guess. It's not really easy to love someone when they don't love you back. You know how many nights I've stayed up, worried sick, only for Vinyl to come stumbling through the door and laugh about how she lost track of time. Do you know how many recitals she's promised to come to? But then I look out over the crowd and there's an empty seat, right in the front row. She was supposed to be there for the gala, to see me play the hybrid for the first time. I lug that piece of crap onto stage and look out and she's not there. I bet if I disappeared without a trace, Vinyl wouldn't even notice until the rent is due.
Octavia sipped the cappuccino once more. She sniffled.
That's us mud ponies, though. We're Equestria's workhorses. Not as graceful as you cloudwalkers, or as magic as unicorns. We're just plain old workhorses who trudge through the mud, and that's all we ever do.
There were tears forming in the corners of Octavia's eyes. Thunderlane stood, walked around the table, and took her in a gentle embrace. His forelegs wrapped around her neck, and his wings wrapped around her body. He expected Octavia to cry, but she did little more than sniffle before she managed to get herself under control. She wiped her eyes with a napkin.
"Joe, would you please put this on my tab?" she asked, and the unicorn nodded curtly.
Octavia took a moment to snuggle into Thunderlane's embrace before looking into his eyes.
"I don't really want to go back to the apartment. Vinyl is there, and I'm not really looking forward to an entire night of listening to her mock and ridicule my profession, even if she doesn't mean to hurt me."
I would open my home to you for as long as you need, but I live in Cloudsdale. It's not exactly safe for one without wings.
Octavia huffed and wiggled out of the embrace.
"Well, there is one alternative. Hey, Joe, is the room open upstairs?"
For you, Octavia, always. Just try and keep it down this time, alright?
The mare looked back to Thunderlane.
"Joe has a small room upstairs. I go there to compose sometimes, so I can be alone without Vinyl's music blasting through the walls. Would you like to come with me?"
Thunderlane realized he hadn't even touched his coffee, and now it had gone cold. He shrugged before following after Octavia and heading into the back. The room was as sparse as one might assume such would be. At first it was dark, but Octavia proceeded to ignite several candles. In the far-off corner was a bed with a blanket carelessly tossed over it, and in the other corner was a large double bass. The sheer size of the instrument, even larger than the instrument Octavia had played on stage, intrigued Thunderlane, and he was tempted to ask for a demonstration of just how such a petite mare could play such an enormous fiddle. He guessed even the largest royal guard would have trouble with it. Octavia sat down at the bed with her body facing Thunderlane, though her head was hung quite low. Thunderlane walked forward, fearing she may be on the cusp of a breakdown, but she began to speak before he could wrap his wings around her.
"Do you think I'm pretty?" she asked.
As I have said throughout the night, I do.
Vinyl was always popular with the colts. Even today, if a stallion talks to me, chances are he just wants to get to her. I understand if that's what this is about. I don't mind. I just like to know, so I don't think this is real.
I'm interested in you,
Thunderlane said softly.
I'm a bit interested in you, too. You're quite handsome, and you're quite sweet. It's so rare to meet a stallion who has a vocabulary beyond a yes, no, and maybe.
Thunderlane smiled. Much to his surprise, Octavia suddenly leaned forward and gently placed her lips on the tip of his muzzle. She leaned back just as quickly, and now wore a scarlet blush on her cheeks.
I'm sorry,
she said, her voice barely above a squeak. Thunderlane placed his hoof under her chin and lifted her face until he could gaze into her eyes. He leaned forward and gently touched his lips to hers, holding it several moments as the blush on Octavia's face deepened. She pulled away.
Would you...
She choked on her words for several moments before asking,
Would you lay down with me? I don't want to be alone tonight. Would you hold me?
Thunderlane smiled and lay down carefully behind Octavia. He wrapped his forelegs around her, then his wings, using them like a blanket. Octavia was smaller than he was, and fit quite snugly against his chest. She set her head down and closed her eyes, drifting into a gentle sleep, though she could not stop the hot tears from dripping down her face. Hours later, she woke. Behind her, Thunderlane was snoring rather loudly and squeezing her as tight as a foal would a teddy bear. She didn't really mind, though, and set her head back down to enjoy this sweet moment of silence. She was slow and careful as she extracted herself from Thunderlane's embrace. First, she lifted his foreleg and gently placed it away from her. Next, she scooted her lower half forward, slipping her hips out of the tight embrace of Thunderlane's spooning. It was far from easy. She had to listen close to his snoring and try to measure his slumber by how deeply he breathed. Even when she was finally free of the tight embrace, she did not want to leave. She wanted to stay like this forever, but she knew that she had to head back to her apartment. Vinyl might be worrying. Before she left, however, she leaned down and planted one final kiss on Thunderlane's muzzle.
"Thank you,"
she whispered into his ear.
"Thank you for being one of the good ones."
With those words said, she tiptoed out of the attic and then out of the shop. The walk back to her loft was actually quite pleasant. Everyone was asleep after the gala last night, so the streets of Canterlot were very nearly empty. Occasionally, a royal guard stood at a street corner, but they were more like statues than fellow ponies and didn't bother Octavia's sense of peace. The sun was out, and there was a nice breeze, and she just felt good, all things considered. At least, until she finally arrived at the apartment, and the obnoxious pound of dubstep rushed through the walls at her. She opened the door and walked to Vinyl's room, where the unicorn was happily pounding her head to some new beat. "Vinyl," Octavia said. Of course, Vinyl didn't hear her. "Vinyl!" When that didn't work, she walked behind the unicorn and gently tapped her shoulder. Vinyl turned around and gave her a wide smile. "Hi, Octy! Oh man, just listen to this!" Octavia rolled her eyes. Reaching past Vinyl, she manually lowered the volume to a more manageable level. Vinyl blushed slightly. "Finally got the beat right," she said, using her indoor voice, which, for her, was actually still quite loud. "It's just so awesome! Took all night, but totally worth it!"
I'm happy you managed to get your beat right. You know, last night was the Galloping Gala, though.
"Oh, jeez, it was last night? I'm sorry, Octy. Neon came by and we just started mixing and... Just listen to it. We finally got this down pat."
It's just... It was the first time I was trying the hybrid. I had prepared a special melody for you. But I looked out and you weren't there.
"Oh, Octavia, I'm really sorry. I just totally forgot. Look, I promise, next time I'll be there, no matter how snooty or boring it is. Front row, I promise. As long as there's booze. Lots and lots of booze is the only way I can sit through one of those."
Okay, Vinyl. Next time. I'll save the new song for then. If you'll excuse me, I should go tune up the hybrid.
"Just try to keep it down, Octy. I gotta finish this track. Neon and I are putting on a show tomorrow night. You're coming, right?"
Of course I am, Vinyl. After all, what are friends for?
Alternate ending. At least until she finally arrived at the loft. The moment she had opened the door, she heard faint crying. That was certainly odd and curious, if slightly worrying. Octavia headed towards the source of the low whimpers. In the kitchen, she spotted Vinyl. The unicorn's upper body was stretched over the table, with her head buried in her forelegs. Whimpers escaped as her body heaved. Occasionally, her horns sparked, a sure sign of an emotionally fragile unicorn. Octavia shook her head.
What happened? Did you break your sunglasses again?
Octavia walked to the refrigerator and opened the door. She skimmed the contents, but when nothing appealed to her, she closed it again. When she turned, Vinyl was standing very close to her, her face contorted into a sad display.
Are you all right, Vinyl? Your eyes are red. More than usual, I mean.
"Where have you been all night?"
I was out with a friend,
Octavia said simply. She had to hold back a scream as Vinyl was suddenly upon her. The unicorn wrapped her forelegs tight about her friend's neck and squeezed tight before burying her face into Octavia's neck. There was so much force suddenly upon her, Octavia actually found herself pushed back into the fridge. I didn't know where you were. I was worried. All night, Octavia. Why didn't you call? I've been worried sick, and you..." Vinyl tilted back and revealed her eyes were puffy. Sparkling drops of tears were in the corners. Soon they ran down her face, wetting the fur on her cheeks. Octavia stroked down Vinyl's back.
I'm sorry,
she said softly. Vinyl said, starting to calm down. "I was worried about you. I didn't know if something had happened or if, after I was late to the gala, I couldn't find you. And I was scared. Some pony said you went wandering off with a Pegasus no one recognized. Octavia, I'm so sorry. I got distracted and you were already gone." Some part of Octavia wanted to mock Vinyl for crying. Some part of her wanted to remind Vinyl of all the nights she had left her alone, worried sick. Those parts of her were fleeting, however, and when Vinyl had calmed down, Octavia put her to bed, where she gently tucked her in. After all, that was what sisters were for. That was Overture. It was written by Exilo and read by Scribbler, with special guests Finish Line as Thunderlane, Goombasa as Sorin and Jack, and Grey Ramos as Pony Joe. Right, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Because there were so many voice actors on this one, it took me a while to put it together, so I have to thank those who've worked on this project for their patience with me for getting the story out. I hope it was worth the wait. In other news, this sounds very strange, but in other news, you can catch me in an interview now on episode 78 of MBS Show, the Malaysian Brony Show. I will put a link to it below. I had great fun doing this interview, and all three of the hosts were absolutely lovely. So go along, listen, chip in with your own comments here below in my video and below in their video, and sub to them because they're very funny. Without further ado, I shall leave so that you can go and listen. Be lovely to each other, and good night, everybody.